Hello and welcome to the Whitehall Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Westminster. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. Also on the podcast, Kirsty Buchanan, who was a special advisor to the Prime Minister Theresa May. Hello, Kirsty.
Hello, Calum.
Hello. And Joe Tanner, political strategist. Hello, Joe.
Hello, hello.
Before we get into what's actually coming up on the podcast, shall we do behind the scenes on Laura Kuenssberg with new star of Sunday morning political television, Joe Tanner, everyone. How was it, Joe?
Yay.
It was stressful because I had to fly back from France early, and there was also a storm going through the UK, which meant that flights were difficult. And it was exciting. I was delighted to have Matt Ford, who I know well, on the panel as well. And there were a number of different people on the show, various leaders of parties. One, Kemi Badenoch, I thought was going to be on the show, but it ended up being Kevin Hollinrake. And I was on with Stephen Flynn on the panel, which was great. And obviously Nigel Farage was on, which was entertaining. There was a sort of, I don't know, almost a sort of anticipation of how was he going to arrive and sort of, you know, come into the building. And was there the best bit for me was the army of photographers that wait outside Broadcasting House to take your picture. And as I walked up, they all turned up snapping away, which obviously years ago as an advisor, I'd go running off to the side to avoid. But they were actually photographing me. And as I got closer, I sort of recognised a few faces and then went, you've now got to delete those pictures because you've realised I'm not important. And they all sort of looked at me and were like, oh yeah, it's her. But it was brilliant. I wish I'd sort of said to someone, can I have one of the pictures just in case I looked quite snazzy? But anyway.
Well, you looked very snazzy on the set, Joe. So, you know.
The makeup people are amazing. They are an absolutely dream team. And it was great. But the set and stuff, I mean, watching it, I don't know about you, but when I watch it, I get a bit frustrated with how much like wandering about there is and stuff on that, on the BBC generally now. But watching Laura Kuenssberg do it, my goodness, she's got these like automated cameras moving around. She's got a crew with a camera that are on a sort of pack that they hang around them, that they're moving around the set. And she's back and forth to us and then going back to her interviewees. And she is an absolute like master at work. It's pretty impressive to watch, I have to say.
It's an amazing operation. We love Queen Laura Kuenssberg. Great that you were on, Joe. That's so cool. Yeah, and
amazing how many people actually watch. What astonishes me is I do loads of stuff and have done loads of stuff for years. But my goodness, the people that have come out the woodwork and contacted me that I haven't spoken to in like 20 years who have realised I'm alive because they saw me in the morning on breakfast telly. It was really funny,
That's
really
so
funny.
nice.
And everyone's been lovely. So at least I didn't fall flat on my face or anything, which was good.
Yeah, certainly not. I think that is absolutely worth seeing. I never really get to watch it live because I tend to be on the radio when it's on, but I do tend to make a point of watching it back and spooling through any boring bits, if indeed on the rare occasion that they might pop up, which is very, very rare, obviously. Good. Oh, well, that's really fun. So, yeah, go and watch Joe. You can get it on iPlayer. Laura Kuenssberg from last Sunday morning. Right, on the podcast today, then, we'll discuss Kemi Badenoch's reshuffle of the shadow cabinet, and we'll touch on a brilliantly forensic, in-depth report from Will Lloyd in the New Statesman, which considers Kemi Badenoch and I suppose her leadership style and how she is performing as Conservative Party leader. Ultimately, actually, it's kind of a picture, I think, this article, of a leader with potential but no grip and leading a party that desperately needs direction and perhaps is lacking that from their leader. We'll get to that. Also, President Trump touches down in Scotland on Friday. He's going to meet the Prime Minister at one of the Trump golf courses, either at Turnberry or in Aberdeen. We're awaiting the official itinerary and all of that. But also we'll be discussing the risk of seeing more riots over this summer because of a breakdown of the fabric of society. The PM's really telling his cabinet that they must do better at improving social cohesion. As you're watching on YouTube or listening on your podcast app, thank you. And remember, you can WhatsApp us. The number is 0333 404 6507. And start your message with the word Whitehall. Right, we'll start with the Conservatives. Sir James Cleverley has made a spectacular comeback to the shadow front bench. He's become the shadow housing secretary. Kemi Badenoch says the Conservatives are moving into a new phase as she announced the reshuffle. She wants to make sure all our heavy hitters are on the bench. Most notably, James Cleverley's new role means he will go up against Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner in the House of Commons. the former Home and Foreign Secretary, had been one of the favourites to replace Rishi Sunak as Conservative leader last year, of course. Some other names just to listen out for throughout our conversation then, the rest of the cabinet reshuffle. So we've got Richard Holden at Transport, Julia Lopez, Science, Kevin Hollenrick becomes party chair, Nigel Huddleston's at Culture, Neil O'Brien is for Policy Renewal and Development, Stuart Andrews at Health, John Glenn is Parliamentary Private Secretary, and then the others, who kind of stay where they are, actually. Sir Mel Stride is the Shadow Chancellor. Robert Jenrick stays at Justice. His name will come up, I'm sure, in our conversation. Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, and Dame Priti Patel as Shadow Foreign Secretary. So they've all stayed where they are. Right, Kirsty, why this week? Why has Kemi Badenoch done this week? The Guardian said it was an attempt to reassert relevance amid disastrous polling. Is that fair?
And the Guardian knows this why. My understanding was that it initially was prompted by the fact that Ed Argar had to stand down due to ill health. Look, it's fairly common about a year into a leadership to have a reshuffle. I appreciate it's not a year in, but nevertheless, you either do it this side of summer or the other side of summer. And all things considered, my guess is that probably as Ed Argar had to stand down, she took it as a wider opportunity to replace some other people that were underperforming in their brief. And whilst I hope Ed Argar is well in himself, he was definitely underperforming against Wes Streeting, who is one of the strongest communicators in the government. So on a practical level, I think what she's done is taken the opportunity to replace some underperformers. Alan Mack has gone from Science. Gareth Bacon has gone from Transport, which is interesting because Gareth Bacon is a very close ally of Kemi Badenoch. So, being a close personal comrade does not stop you or spare you. And there's been some good moves. I think Nigel Huddleston makes sense in DCMS. He was a former Culture, Media and Sport Minister. He knows the stakeholder, much more his kind of cup of tea. Stuart Andrew, I think, will be better in health. He has a background in health charities and hospices that will serve him well. Kevin Hollenrick's got his work cut out for him at CCHQ. Someone tells me he's the 5th chairman of the party in 5 years. Some stability is definitely needed, and the place has been completely hollowed out. So God knows how he's going to rebuild from that. But then obviously the whole thing was dominated by two people. One was James Cleverley coming back in, and the other one was Rob Jenrick staying exactly where he was. And for me, if I was going to overread into the runes of what this says about direction of travel, thank you. For it is my role. I think what it says is that she is trying to signal that her role, as she sees it, is to take the fight to the government. It is not to take the fight to the Reform Party. So in other words, she doesn't want to give a bigger platform to Rob Jenrick, who is the living embodiment of kind of Reform Light and the push for more kind of Reform Light policies within the party. Whereas Sir James Cleverley is a good traditional centre-right sort of centrist, as it were. He's also a great foil for Angela Rayner. That will be quite an interesting match when those two square it up in PMQs. So I think it says more about positioning-wise. It says, no, our job as opposition is to take the fight to the government, not to try and outperform reform. But also she's just weeded out some people that just, frankly, were almost invisible in their roles.
Joe, just on that, the kind of quote is that the reshuffle is to reflect the next stage of the party's policy renewal programme and underline party unity. What specifics would you pick up on from this reshuffle as to where Badenoch is trying to position, what she wants to emphasise, what her priorities are?
I'm not sure we clearly know. I mean, I think the bits that Kirsty didn't cover was the revival of one Francis Maude coming back as an advisor to Kemi Badenoch. And that is somebody who has been around an incredibly long time and actually does have serious expertise in things like civil service reform. That's been a big pet project of Francis's and civil service sort of efficiencies, all the sort of stuff that's being talked about politically, but not really being done. Francis has a very strong history in and knowledge of, but also Henry Newman. It's interesting that Lee Rowley, who it's been said wouldn't stand up to Kemi or tell her bad news, has gone as a key ally, yes, but actually bringing back somebody who perhaps has been around for some more challenging times for the Tories at the heart of government and may be willing to be a bit more punchy. Let's see. I mean, that's going to be interesting as to whether Kemi is going to surround herself with people that are actually going to tell her what's really going on rather than what she wants to hear. And, you know, Kirsty and I are fully aware that, you know, probably some of the most successful leaders are the ones that actually have people around them that do tell them as it is. There's nothing worse than doing a pretty ropey media interview, getting back in the car and saying, how did I do? And the person next to you saying, fantastic. And then you go and do another bad one. It's just, you know, you need to have some sensible voices around you. The other one as well is Mark McInnes has come in to look after things at the party in terms of the money and the sort of organisation, a sort of separate role to obviously what the party chairman does. And that is quite crucial because one of the problems post an election defeat is how skint you are as a party. And therefore, you know, how it's really difficult because you have very limited resources for research. Your ability to actually oppose is massively affected if you can't get the quality of researchers in. You always end up with a hollowed out party. So to some extent, there are some names that are sort of coming back into the fray. And I think, you know, certainly Sir James Cleverley's a big figure in that. And, you know, they've needed to look at the communicators on the bench because Kemi doesn't seem to be particularly willing to do media very often. She doesn't seem to be putting herself out there. She wasn't on the show on Sunday that I certainly had expected that she was going to be on. And I think, I don't really know if it is a changing direction. I'm not sure. I think part of the problem is she set up this whole thing around these policy commissions that have got, we're sort of, I mean, I'll be really honest, I'm finding the whole political spectrum really frustrating because we've got Labour government come in and just doing loads of reviews. And then you're waiting off the back of the review for a policy of some sort. You know, what is it we're actually going to do? So the plan for change that they apparently have ready to go wasn't ready to go because actually it was a plan for reviews that they had ready to go. And then the actual stuff they were going to do is then significantly down the line, you know, maybe up to a year, maybe even longer. The social care review isn't even underway or is barely underway that Louise Casey's doing, for example. You know, there is a challenge here that you've then got an opposition who is sort of doing their own homework as well in these policy commissions, and therefore their ability to oppose is pretty limited. And that's where this void is being created for the likes of Farage to sort of step into and just, quite frankly, say anything. Whether it's got any foundations or not doesn't matter. He just says something because it sounds interesting.
And that brings us, I think, to what Will Lloyd has been reporting in the New Statesman today, to some extent, doesn't it? Because his article suggests that Kemi Badenoch taking this kind of slow academic approach to rebuilding the Conservative Party with these 2 years' worth of policy commissions isn't perhaps urgent enough as far as the party is concerned. There's a phrase in there that I've written down, upstairs, downstairs, to describe the culture in her operation. So having big name intellectuals like Neil Ferguson advising at the top of the party and then underpaid junior staff at the bottom. And whether, Kirsty, that is a structure that lends itself to being quick and nimble and responsive and well considered.
It's the Conservative Party. There's always an element of upstairs, downstairs about it. I don't think that's any different under Kemi Badenoch than it was any other leader. Look,
hang on, it was upstairs, downstairs, and then like the deepest, darkest basement at times. You know, there's even levels within the levels. Let's face it, I remember it well.
So me and Joe managed to scrape up to where you could see the sunshine out the window
through a bomb-proof curtain that didn't withstand a light breeze.
Yeah. Look, I think I've said it before on this podcast, but for those of you that haven't heard me bore on about this before, look, you know, the party didn't get what it thought it was voting for. What it thought it was voting for was Kemi the Street Fighter. You remember at that party conference last year, and they had the four candidates that were remaining giving their pitch, and she said something in terms of, you know, people could say I could have a fight in an empty room, you know, I will fight for what they got instead of Kemi the fighter was Kemi the engineer. And, you know, she has decided to, you know, lift up the bonnet and have a long strategic look at what's wrong and formulate policies and yada, yada, yada. But life comes at you fast these days, and communication quite often beats in-depth political thinking, and so it reminds me a little bit both of Sunak and Liz Truss in a way, because there was an intellectual kind of component to it. A lot of the people they surround themselves with are very intelligent in their own right. I mean, the other noticeable one here, Neil O'Brien, former spad to Theresa May, former spad to George Osborne, super smart guy, set up Onward, a very kind of progressive, interesting think tank. But, this is not a think tank, but it's beginning to feel slightly like a think tank to me. There's a lot of spadocracy around her. Henry Newman is a kind of intellectual guy. There's too much intelligence, not enough doing, and not enough good old gut instinct. Mark McGuinness, by the way, I think is a smart move. I work with Mark. He's got good political gut, but frankly, there aren't enough people around her with good political gut. And what's interesting about the Will Lloyd piece is he seems to be saying a couple of things which I genuinely thought were fascinating. One, those early kind of faltering steps when she kind of came out as a fighter, was pulled up for gaffes, knocked her kind of confidence, and her response to it was to in terms, run away and hide, so she doesn't do media anymore. The battle of having your party spanked is twofold, really. One is relevance, which means you've got to pop up ad nauseum on the media. It doesn't matter what you're saying, what you're doing, just got to be there a lot. And two, you've got to have tons and tons and tons of charm journalists to give you the time of day, charm donors to give you their cash, charm people to work for you for free because the party's got no money anymore. Charm. Whatever else Kemi is noted for, charm is not one of her strong suits, and if she hides from the media too, it clearly allows people like Jenrick to sort of move into that space. So no, she's not making the weather. She's running it like a think tank, and it just, you don't, I hear all this time, oh, this was like this for Thatcher. She had 2 really kind of dodgy, ropey years when she started out. That was like the early 80s. This is an age of social media and warp speed politics. We don't have 2 years for an overly intellectualised view that will pretty much, I suspect, take us back to what you call traditional Tory policies. So, yeah, she's not making the weather because she's too busy sort of with her head in the books.
And they're not filling the void. When I worked at the Tories, I joined there in 1999 after having voted for Labour in 97. And I thought working for the opposition would be interesting. I thought I would learn a lot. I sort of thought it would be fun. The 2001 election was miserable. It was awful. It was the prime of the infighting of the Tories, Portillo's lot versus Haig's lot. It was grim. And when IDS came in, the Tories had lost badly, and IDS was not considered to be inspiring at all. And yet what we did do, which is partly what Jenrick's done, is we ended up doing a lot of sort of deep dives and looking at issues. So I put Damien Green, who was the Shadow Education Secretary at the time, I put him in a school in Wandsworth for 4 or 5 days where he spent his, the breaks. He was in the staff room with the teachers. He had I think the NUT rep was his minder for the week. Couldn't have been more awful for a Tory. But, he was there doing uniform checks in the morning. He was there on the gate as the kids were leaving. He spoke to parents. He understood what life as a teacher was like for just those few days, right? He didn't get it all, but the teachers respected the fact that he was doing the work to find out what it was really like. And I don't think the policy commission stuff is enough. I think from a Labour government point of view, what they're not doing is telling people how they're getting to the plans that they're putting into place. They've got these reviews, but there's no narrative to any of that. There's no, I would have liked to have had almost websites around the different missions and what they're doing to get towards things and how everything's threading together. And the Tories on the other side are not demonstrating what they are doing. So when I did that stint with Damien Green in a school, we had a piece, we had a diary in the Teacher magazine, which was the NUT's publication, to its members. Now, they all Damien's colleagues thought that he was going to the left. They were like, what are you doing in the NUT's magazine? And he was like, well, they might as well at least see that I'm trying to understand what they go through. I'm trying to understand what the job is. It's like Michael Portillo being the hospital porter. It's that sort of, it's almost like going back to the floor. And I think Kirsty's right. It's all a bit too cerebral. And actually what they should be doing is going, we're going to go out there and we're actually going to learn the lessons of what we did wrong and what the impact was of that. That's what they should be doing. Fine if you don't want to apologise for it anymore, but blooming well get out there and understand the impact and therefore how big the challenge is. And I don't think they're doing that work. And certainly on the other hand, Labour as a government seem like they're even more removed from the people that they've ever been. So there is a void created, which again I go back to when Nigel sort of says something and it's not even completely substantiated. People just go, oh yeah, sounds good. So I think this disconnect is just going to get bigger the way they're headed. They're not closing that gap at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You compare this kind of head in the sand, refusal, disinclination to be on the media unless you've got something important to say. You compare that with Farage, or you compare that with Trump and his flood the zone. Farage and Trump pop up all the time on the media to say all kinds of nonsense. A lot of it is not intellectually coherent. You know, Farage's figures are a load of old hooey and everybody knows it, including Farage, and he doesn't really care. It's politics by vibes and what sits vaguely under there. It's not politics by values anymore, it's politics by vibes. And it doesn't matter what you're saying. You're 4 years out from an election. What matters is if you're kind of echoing vaguely where people are and you say a lot all of the time. And the thing that blows my mind about the inability to kind of carve out this space, and it is interesting in as much as, whilst I think for her own point of view, it was probably smart not to give Rob Jenrick the job that he so desperately wants, which is Shadow Chancellor. You know, Mel Stride's doing an okay job, but we've got a government that came in and bet the farm on growth. Now we have a Chancellor who had a budget last year where she raised taxes by an eye-watering £40 billion and said, I won't do this again. I won't be coming back for any more, right? And now we're in exactly the same situation that we were in this time last year. Months of speculation leading up to the budget about, you know, what taxes are going to be raised and who is going to get hit and hurt by those, compounded by the fact that the government missed the opportunity to blame Trump's tariffs for a global slowdown for the reason why they need to raise taxes, and instead of basically signalled to the world, because we can't get even modest public sector spending cuts through our own party, regardless about the fact that they were the wrong cuts, but, you know, we can't get spending cuts through our own party, we're going to have to come back and tax you. Highly created by Labour. We have whatever else we have, you know, leaving aside the blip of Liz Truss, broadly speaking, we have a Conservative Party that in the round has a reputation for economic competence. This should be open season for them. And yet, where are they? Where are they on this? You know, this is entirely one that was created at the Treasury. Our economy is on a precipice, you know, and yet nothing.
And that speaks to the problems. It's a fascinating read from Will Lloyd. Let's go on then to discuss the front page story of The Times today and how actually it's evolved even since the paper was printed, actually, because at the time of recording on Wednesday afternoon, protests erupted outside the Britannia International Hotel in Canary Wharf in London after false rumours spread that asylum seekers were being relocated there from the Bell Hotel in Epping. There was a strong police presence and temporary fencing around the hotel, and no migrants have been transferred at the time of speaking. Claims were officially denied at the time. The unrest was fuelled by online misinformation and amplified by far-right figures, including the man who calls himself Tommy Robinson. The incident highlights these rising tensions really over the government's use of hotels to house asylum seekers, especially in these sorts of urban areas. Indeed, there is tension with the council. Tower Hamlets Council in London expressing concern over a lack of consultation and strain on local services. The Home Office facing criticism from local authorities, from activists, and all of this feeding this warning that Sir Keir Starmer's given about social cohesion and the need to try to avoid riots like those that we saw in England last summer. This is about immigration, of course, Joe. It's after tension at the Bell Hotel in Epping, protests that were really quite aggressive at times as well in the last week or so. Of course, it's disinformation. Of course, it's about policing. It's about political policy. It's about integration as well. Is Starmer right to be issuing this warning that riots may erupt if more isn't done?
I don't really care whether he's issuing a warning or not. What's he doing about it? I mean, part of this is disinformation. Part of this is about the level of the debate that's being had and the sort of mudslinging as well about some of the people that are involved that have been raising concerns, some far more legitimately than others. And ultimately, if this is as serious, and given that it does feel like this sort of tinderbox sort of effect that, even just a hint of something else has meant that a load of people suddenly go en masse somewhere else, then quite frankly, I'd rather Keir Starmer doesn't talk about it. I'd rather he has a group of people around a table saying, what are we going to do about it? And quite frankly, there is a justification to getting in the other leaders of the parties and saying we need to join forces here to stop a serious summer of unrest. If that is a genuine concern, then that there should be some proper action where you actually pull together that are involved in the debate, involved in the public debate, and say, what are we going to do to ensure that we do not make a potential situation significantly worse? And I don't see any of that. I don't see any reaching across to other parties. It just feels, the language being used. Yeah, you can toughen it a bit, but so what? To what end? What's it going to do? It's not going to make a blind bit of difference. So I do think that the lack of action is the bigger issue here.
The hotel in Epping that I mentioned, which has been the centre of these protests over the past couple of weeks, they followed the arrest of an Ethiopian man accused of sexually assaulting a schoolgirl within 8 days of arriving in the UK on a small boat. And in those protests, 10 people have been arrested so far. So the Home Office, in their statement, Kirsty said, asylum seekers are not being removed from that Bell Hotel in Epping, but sources told The Times that the hotel in Canary Wharf has been reserved for the use of migrants, but the suggestion is that they won't actually be required to be put in those rooms. There won't be enough people, basically, until crossings across the Channel happen next week. All of this fuels that tense feeling that Joe was just referring to.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? That Will Lloyd piece in the New Statesman, apart from being fascinating about Kemi Badenoch and her own kind of time in office, it speaks to something that sits underneath that she kind of, I think he's trying to say she symbolises. She was the solution to a problem from 10 or 15 years ago, is his argument as a leader. She's not the answer now. And what I mean by that is, she came up as a sort of slap in the face to the kind of woke culture wars, identity politics that dominated the last sort of 20, 15 years. And I think what we have seen, which has been rocket fueled by social media, is those rows have actually hardened into something much more dangerous, much more calcified, and much more polarising, which is actually, this isn't just about virtue signalling. There is something really fundamental and fundamentally dangerous and unnerving, I think, going on in our society now, which is fueled by disinformation, which is fueled by conspiracy theories being shared on social life, and is fueled by people exploiting the politics of grievance too, populists, right, for argument's sake. And one of those things is this idea. Look, we've had two, in sort of the last 2 or 3 generations, we've had 2 mass immigration events. One was under New Labour when we had, if you remember, those Eastern European accession countries. And I remember David Blunkett saying 14,000 people will come because quite a lot of the other EU countries put, a few years delay on their ability to claim benefits. And we didn't because we wanted the kind of low-cost immigration so that it could give us an economic bump up, which it did, by the way. But in the end, 10 times as many people came. And funnily enough, you were talking about Tower Hamlets. I lived at Tower Hamlets at the time. Tower Hamlets was, and I think probably still is, the most ethnically diverse borough in London and presumably, therefore, the whole of the UK. I noticed the impact of those accession countries in my community. It was visible, it was felt. And the other, of course, was under Boris Johnson, when I think they relaxed the rules too much post-COVID, and we had that huge, million, migrants coming over in a year. I think the scale of those things is unnerving, but something else is also driving underneath that right now, which is the sense that a lot of the people who are now here not only do not share British values, but this is where the conspiracy stuff comes in, are actively working in some kind of... I've had people that I know that I think are relatively sensible say this to me, that they are working to take over British society from the. And that is why we've seen... I remember saying to a friend of mine years ago who came into the Conservative Party when it was all David Cameron, hug a hoodie, vote blue, go green, etc. And then I said to her once, did it ever occur to you that Cameron and Osborne were the blip, and this that we're experiencing now is the norm? And actually what I think we've seen happen is a splintering, and we'll see it happen in the Labour Party too. So that the broad church of centrism that you used to have in the Conservative Party has split. So that you've got, in essence, Reform, which are much more kind of anti-immigrant, our culture, our very way of life is under threat, and a kind of good old traditional Conservative sort of, socially liberal, economically kind of Thatcherite, small state, which feels almost anachronistic, which is the point I think Will Lloyd was bringing up in his brilliant piece. And on the left, you've got the same polarisation beginning to happen, which is fuelled by the issues over Gaza. So you've got kind of centrist hangover from New Labour, Starmer trying to hold it all together, and this growing rump on the left, which will eventually splinter and cause them as many problems, I suspect, in the end, as the Reform is causing to the Conservatives.
Is it one of those, Joe, where the government has to be careful in its messaging because it could talk us into riots, or are we already kind of at the point of real tension, and so actually it is the time to say it out loud?
I mean, yes and no. There's definitely an element, I suppose, of what they say is something we need to be conscious of. But also, what other people are saying that they are not slapping down is also really problematic. So you may remember that Sarah Poachin, the new Reform MP, she has made a few times claims about it being a fact that Afghans and Eritreans are more likely to carry out sexual assaults against women. She was pulled up on that by, I think it was Vicky Young on Politics Live on the BBC last week. Nigel Farage was repeating it again in his speech this week. And media outlets are saying it's not true. But where is the slapdown? Where are the numbers from the government being forcefully put out? Where is Keir Starmer saying this language is not acceptable? This is the stuff that actually fuels a really serious problem with social cohesion. Like, they're not, it feels like the media are more willing to challenge than actually the government are, when actually the reality of Nigel Farage's reality, or false reality that he's putting out there, is the dangerous bit. And it doesn't feel to me that it's right for it just to be the media that make those challenges. It should be that the government are doing more around that. And then if they are, they're not doing very forcefully, because it doesn't seem to be getting through. So I do think this is where if I was Keir Starmer, I'd be saying, I challenge you all to come to number 10, and we're going to sit down and we're going to go through what is responsible language in the current climate and what isn't. And we will agree to disagree on the policies to deal with some of this stuff. But the bottom line is, you cannot fuel these conspiracy theories and concerns where some of this stuff just is not true. Now, obviously, there will be stuff that will be true. There will be things that you can point to. But there is a significant proportion of this that are people that are scared and are picking up on things, and 2 and 2 is suddenly adding up to 7. And I don't think the government's doing anywhere near enough to challenge it.
Shall we go on to one of the world's leading purveyors of fake news, President Trump? Just for a quick question and answer from each of you on his arrival into Scotland, which is on Friday. He's here for a 4-day trip. It's his first visit to the UK since his re-election. He'll be visiting his golf resorts at Turnberry in Ayrshire and many in Aberdeenshire. The White House is describing the visit as a private trip that is being policed by Police Scotland and, your taxes. Anyway, private trip. He's going to be meeting the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He'll also be meeting the First Minister, John Swinney. There's a suggestion that Nigel Farage may end up saying hello to him as well at one of the golf courses. Who knows? This is all ahead of his return to the UK for an official state visit in September. Kirsty, should we have high hopes for some sort of brilliant outcome for Sir Keir Starmer and the country from this? Perhaps a round of golf with the President might yield some results?
What high hopes are you thinking for?
Well, I don't know.
I suppose
trade,
we could always. Well, we've got that apparently brilliant trade deal. Look, I think there is still work to be done on trying to remove the remaining tariffs on the sectors that Trump hasn't lifted them off in Britain yet. So there is plenty of reason for Keir Starmer to tootle up there and kiss the ring for the good of the nation. And look,
I hate that, Steve. It just makes me feel a bit weird whenever you say it.
But it's true, though, isn't it? This is not a man that responds to people standing up to him. He responds to people kissing his butt. And to be fair to Starmer, which I'm sure Starmer doesn't enjoy doing this, but he's done a very good job of fluffing the presidential ego and getting a good outcome for it. He has proved far more adept at that than most European politicians, and kind of good luck to that. So if he wants to go up there and say, yes, Donald, no, Donald, 3 bags full, Donald, and by the way, can we have another look at some of these tariffs, and he gets some success, then kind of hats off to him. It's not pretty. It is a bit queasy. Not everything you do in any job is going to be great, but it's the outcome that matters, right?
Joe?
Well, as I said on Laura Kuenssberg's programme, I thought they should have a bit of foot golf, and I'm sure plenty could be.
Foot golf, sorry. Right, okay.
Foot golf.
Sounds
I don't know what you were thinking, Calum. This podcast is taking a real turn.
It often does.
Foot golf is a very different sport where you have slightly bigger balls and bigger holes, and you use your feet. But I thought maybe there would be We've lost Kirsty. I thought maybe there would be a bit of Keir's sort of skills could be shown with his football prowess, and they could sort of still combine one of Trump's loves. I mean, goodness knows, right? It's supposed to be a private visit, and yet actually everyone's turning out, and it's costing us money to manage.
A fortune.
And then you wonder, like, well, what exactly is going to come up? I personally assume that this is let's just go, let's just be nice, let's all smile, let's just not upset him, and make sure that he sort of leaves having done the business end of things he wants to do from his golf course point of view. And he leaves, and we haven't changed his view of us, would be my sort of feeling as to the sort of objectives. If there's anything else that happens that's rather marvellous because he says something wonderful about the UK and how great it is, then brilliant. But, if anything, it's fraught with potential risk because of protests and things as he arrives. And then he's going to be coming back a few weeks later. So if anything, I think it's risky him coming in. I'd rather have just left it for the mid-September visit.
There we are then. The Trump visit. Bigger balls, bigger holes, and more feet. On that note, Kirsty and Joe, thank you both. They did say it would be a private visit.
Title of our sex tape. Yeah, go on.
Kirsty and Joe, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Can we release this in soft focus, Calum, as well?
Yeah, I'm going to put
for
some
like when
jazz.
this goes out, can we just have like a soft focus and some soft music in the background?
We certainly can. I've got plenty of it here, just waiting to be used, in fact. Right, thank you both. Let's bail before we all get ourselves in more trouble. Thank you so much for listening to the Whitehall Sources podcast. We're very grateful that you're there. Thank you. Press subscribe on your podcast app or press subscribe on YouTube if you'd like to watch along. And we will talk to you again next week.